Maria Santos never imagined that her simple job cleaning aircraft hangars would lead to one of the most extraordinary moments of her life. At 28 years old, she had been working at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada for 3 years, arriving every morning at 5 a.m. sharp with her cleaning cart and supplies. The massive hangars housed some of the most advanced fighter jets in the world, and Maria took pride in maintaining the spotless environment that these magnificent machines deserved. The daughter of Mexican immigrants, Maria had grown up understanding the value of hard work. Her father had worked construction for 30 years, and her mother cleaned offices downtown. They had taught her that no honest work was beneath anyone's dignity, and that taking pride in your job, no matter what it was, made all the difference. Maria carried this philosophy with her as she moved through the cavernous hangars each day, carefully dusting equipment, mopping floors, and ensuring that every surface gleamed. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, the desert air was crisp and clear as Maria wheeled her cart into Hangar 7. The space was enormous, capable of housing 6 F-16 Fighting Falcons simultaneously. The concrete floors stretched endlessly, marked with yellow lines indicating where each aircraft should be positioned. Overhead, massive lights illuminated the space with harsh fluorescent brightness, and the ceiling disappeared into shadows far above. As Maria began her routine, she noticed something unusual near the far wall of the hangar. A small puddle of dark fluid had formed beneath one of the maintenance platforms. In her 3 years of working here, she had learned to recognize different types of leaks and spills. This wasn't the usual hydraulic fluid or engine oil that sometimes dripped from aircraft during routine maintenance. The color was wrong, and there was something about the way it reflected the overhead lights that caught her attention. Maria approached the area cautiously, pulling on her rubber gloves. The military personnel had always been respectful to her, but she also knew that certain areas and certain situations required extra care. She had been trained to report any unusual findings immediately, but she also understood that false alarms could disrupt important operations. Kneeling beside the puddle, Maria noticed that the liquid had a distinct smell, sharp and chemical-like, but not quite like any of the maintenance fluids she had encountered before. More concerning was what appeared to be a very thin crack running along the metal seam where 2 panels met on the platform structure. The crack was barely visible, perhaps only a few millimeters wide, but the dark liquid seemed to be seeping from this exact location. Maria's mind raced as she considered what to do. The platform was used for accessing the upper portions of fighter jets during maintenance and pre-flight inspections. If there was a structural issue with this platform, it could potentially put maintenance crews and pilots at risk. She had seen how carefully the ground crews worked, trusting that every piece of equipment was in perfect working order. Standing up, Maria looked around the hangar for any personnel she could alert immediately. The early morning shift hadn't fully begun yet, and she was often the first person in the building. Her supervisor wouldn't arrive for another hour, but Maria knew that some maintenance crews started their work very early, especially when aircraft were scheduled for dawn training missions. She made her way to the communication board near the hangar entrance, where emergency contact numbers were posted. Maria had never used these numbers before, but the situation seemed to warrant immediate attention. With slightly trembling fingers, she dialed the number for the maintenance supervisor. Maintenance Control, this is Sergeant Morrison. Hello, this is Maria Santos, the cleaning staff for Hangar 7. I found something unusual that I think you should know about. There was a brief pause. What kind of unusual, ma'am? Maria described what she had found. Trying to use the technical terms she had picked up over her years of working around aircraft maintenance. Sergeant Morrison listened carefully and told her to stay in the area, but not to touch anything else until someone could come to inspect it. Within 10 minutes, 2 maintenance technicians arrived at the hangar, followed shortly by Sergeant Morrison himself. Maria led them to the platform where she had discovered the leak and the crack. The technicians immediately recognized the significance of what she had found. "Good catch," said one of the technicians, a young woman with stripes on her uniform. "This platform is scheduled for use this morning for pre-flight inspection on that F-16 over there." Sergeant Morrison was already on his radio, speaking in clipped military terminology that Maria didn't fully understand. What she did understand was the urgency in his voice and the serious expressions on everyone's faces. As more personnel arrived to assess the situation, Maria continued with her cleaning duties in other areas of the hangar. She didn't want to interfere with the important work being done, but she found herself glancing over at the platform area repeatedly. The maintenance team had cordoned off the entire section and was conducting what appeared to be a thorough inspection of not just that platform, but several others as well. Around 9 a.m., as Maria was finishing her work in the administrative area of the hangar, she overheard a conversation between two officers that made her heart skip a beat. If she hadn't found that crack, Lieutenant Williams would have been on that platform this morning for his pre-flight, said one officer. The structural engineer said it could have given way under load. Could have been a serious injury, or worse, replied the other. Maria realized with a growing sense of awe that her simple attention to detail during routine cleaning had potentially prevented a serious accident. Lieutenant Williams? She didn't know who that was, but apparently he was scheduled to use the very platform that had the structural defect. As she prepared to leave the hangar and move on to her next assigned building, Maria reflected on how strange it was that such a small observation could have such significant consequences. She had simply been doing her job, the same job she did every day, but today that job had taken on an importance she never could have imagined. The rest of her workday passed normally, but Maria found herself thinking about the morning's events. When she arrived home to her small apartment that evening, she called her mother to tell her about what had happened. "Mija," her mother said in Spanish, "God puts us where we need to be. Your careful eyes saved someone today." Maria's mother had always been philosophical about life's unexpected turns. But as Maria lay in bed that night, she wondered if there was more to this story than just a lucky observation. Tomorrow would bring another early morning, another routine day of cleaning. But somehow she sensed that things were about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The next morning, as Maria arrived at Nellis Air Force Base, she noticed an unusual amount of activity around Hangar 7. Several official-looking vehicles were parked outside, and there seemed to be more personnel than usual moving in and out of the building. Maria wondered if the platform issue had led to a larger investigation, but she had learned during her time at the base that asking too many questions wasn't always appropriate. As she approached the hangar with her cleaning cart, a young man in a flight suit emerged from the building. He was tall and lean, with short brown hair and the confident bearing that seemed common among the pilots she occasionally saw around the base. When he noticed Maria approaching, he paused and looked at her with what seemed like recognition, though Maria was certain she had never seen him before. "Excuse me," he called out, walking toward her. "Are you Maria Santos, the cleaning staff who found the structural issue yesterday?" Maria nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious. It wasn't common for pilots to know her name or to approach her directly. "I'm Lieutenant Danny Williams," he said, extending his hand. "I believe you may have saved my life yesterday." Maria stared at Lieutenant Williams, hardly believing what she was hearing. The confident pilot who stood before her seemed too young to be flying the sophisticated fighter jets she cleaned around every day, but his uniform bore the unmistakable wings of a combat pilot, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of experiences beyond his apparent years. "I don't understand," Maria said quietly, still gripping the handle of her cleaning cart. "I just found a leak on the platform. Anyone would have done the same thing." Lieutenant Williams shook his head with a slight smile. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's not entirely true. The structural engineers spent all yesterday afternoon analyzing that platform. What you identified as a simple leak was actually hydraulic fluid from a hairline fracture in a critical support beam. The platform was rated for 500 pounds, but the crack had reduced its load capacity to maybe 150 pounds. Maria felt a chill run down her spine as the implications became clear. "How much do you weigh, Lieutenant?" 185 pounds, plus about 30 pounds of gear for a typical pre-flight inspection, he replied. "I was scheduled to be on that platform at 0700 hours yesterday morning. The only reason I wasn't was because your early report delayed the inspection schedule." As they spoke, Maria noticed that other personnel in the area were watching their conversation with interest. It seemed that word of her discovery had spread throughout the maintenance and flight operations community. She felt simultaneously proud and overwhelmed by the attention. "Lieutenant Williams," Maria began, then paused. "May I ask you something?" "Of course, ma'am." "What exactly do you do? I mean, what kind of missions do you fly?" Danny's expression grew more serious. "I'm part of the 64th Aggressor Squadron. We fly simulated combat missions to train other pilots for real-world deployments. Yesterday's inspection was for a training exercise where we simulate enemy aircraft tactics. If I had fallen from that platform and been injured, it wouldn't just have affected me. It would have impacted the training schedule for an entire squadron of pilots heading to deployment zones." Maria absorbed this information slowly. She had known that the work at Nellis was important, but she hadn't fully grasped how interconnected everything was. Her small action had prevented not just one injury, but potentially disrupted critical training that could affect pilots in combat situations around the world. "There's something else," Danny continued. "The engineers found similar stress patterns on 3 other platforms in hangars across the base. Your observation led to a complete safety audit that identified multiple potential hazards. The base commander wants to implement new inspection protocols based on what you found." Over the following weeks, Maria found herself in an unusual position. Her daily routine continued much the same, but now maintenance personnel and pilots would nod to her in recognition when she passed through the hangars. Sergeant Morrison had recommended her for a commendation, and there was talk of a small ceremony to acknowledge her contribution to base safety. Maria felt uncomfortable with the attention at first. She had grown up in a family that valued hard work but avoided the spotlight. Her parents had taught her to do her job well without expecting recognition or praise. But as she thought about Lieutenant Williams and the other pilots whose safety might have been affected, she began to understand that accepting recognition wasn't about personal glory. It was about highlighting the importance of attention to detail in everything they all did. 3 weeks after the incident, Maria was called to a meeting in the base commander's office. She had never been in the administrative building before, and the formal atmosphere made her nervous. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the base commander, was a woman in her mid-50s, with gray hair and the kind of presence that commanded immediate respect. "Ms. Santos," Colonel Mitchell began, "what you did represents the very best of what we try to achieve here at Nellis. You saw something that didn't look right, and you took action. That kind of vigilance and responsibility is essential to our mission." The colonel went on to explain that Maria's observation had led to changes that would affect safety protocols across multiple Air Force installations. The platform manufacturers had been notified of the design flaw, and new inspection procedures were being developed to identify similar issues before they became dangerous. "We'd like to offer you an opportunity," Colonel Mitchell continued. "Our safety office is looking for someone with your eye for detail to join their team as a civilian inspector. It would mean additional training, more responsibility, and a significant increase in pay. Are you interested?" Maria was stunned. In 3 years of cleaning hangars, she had never imagined that her work might lead to a completely different career path. The safety inspector position would mean working directly with engineers and maintenance crews, learning about aircraft systems, and playing a direct role in preventing accidents. "Could I have some time to think about it?" Maria asked. "Of course. Take a week to consider it and let me know your decision." That evening, Maria called her parents to discuss the opportunity. Her father, who had spent his career in physically demanding construction work, was thrilled at the possibility of his daughter moving into a technical field with better long-term prospects. "Mija," he said, "opportunities like this don't come often. You have to grab them when they do." Her mother was characteristically thoughtful. "What does your heart tell you, Maria? Do you think this is the right path?" Maria spent the week observing her work environment with new eyes. She watched the maintenance crews working on aircraft, noticed how the safety inspectors moved through the hangars with clipboards and instruments, and tried to imagine herself in that role. The work would be challenging, requiring her to learn technical skills she had never needed before. But it would also allow her to contribute to the mission in a more direct way. On Friday morning, as Maria was finishing her cleaning routine in Hangar 7, she encountered Lieutenant Williams again. He was conducting a pre-flight inspection on a different aircraft, using a new platform that had been installed to replace the faulty one Maria had identified. "Have you made a decision about the safety inspector position?" he asked when he saw her. Maria was surprised that he knew about the offer. "Word travels fast around here, doesn't it?" "The pilot community is pretty small," Danny replied with a grin. "We all know about the woman who saved my wing. That's actually what we call you, the guardian of Hangar 7. "I'm still thinking about whether I'm qualified for something like that," Maria admitted. Danny stopped what he was doing and looked at her seriously. "Miss Santos, qualifications can be learned. What you have, the ability to notice details that others miss, the sense of responsibility to report problems even when it's not specifically your job, the care you take in everything you do. Those things can't be taught. They're who you are." His words resonated with Maria more than all the official commendations and meetings with senior officers. Here was someone whose life had been directly affected by her actions, telling her that she had something valuable to contribute. That afternoon, Maria walked into Colonel Mitchell's office with her decision. She would accept the safety inspector position with one condition. She wanted to continue some cleaning duties in the hangars. The routine work had taught her to see the everyday details that others might overlook, and she didn't want to lose that perspective. Colonel Mitchell agreed immediately. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes you perfect for this job, Ms. Santos." As Maria left the administrative building that day, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few weeks. A routine morning of cleaning had led to preventing an accident, which had led to recognition, which had led to a new career opportunity. But more than that, it had taught her that every job, no matter how simple it might seem, could have profound importance if approached with care and attention. Walking past Hangar 7, Maria saw Lieutenant Williams preparing for another training flight. He waved when he saw her, and she waved back, knowing that their brief encounter had changed both of their lives in unexpected ways. Tomorrow would bring her first day of training as a safety inspector. But tonight she wanted to call her parents and tell them how their lessons about taking pride in honest work had led to something neither of them could have imagined. 6 months into her new role as a safety inspector, Maria had discovered that her intuition for spotting potential problems extended far beyond cleaning supplies and structural cracks. She had identified faulty wiring in electrical panels, worn components in hydraulic systems, and even procedural gaps that could lead to human error. Her unique background gave her a perspective that complemented the technical training of traditional inspectors. She saw the base as a living, working environment where small details could have enormous consequences. The training had been intensive but fascinating. Maria learned about aircraft systems, safety protocols, regulatory requirements, and investigation procedures. Her instructors were impressed by her natural ability to observe patterns and notice when something was out of place. What had seemed like simple common sense in her cleaning work turned out to be a sophisticated form of environmental awareness that many people struggled to develop. Lieutenant Williams had become an unofficial mentor, helping her understand the pilot's perspective on safety issues. Their professional relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect. Danny was preparing for deployment to a combat zone, and his squadron was in the final phase of intensive training exercises. On a warm April morning, Maria was conducting a routine inspection in Hangar 3 when she noticed something that made her pause. The hangar housed F-35 Lightning II aircraft, much more advanced than the F-16s she had worked around in her cleaning days. As she moved through her checklist, examining maintenance equipment and work areas, she observed an unusual pattern in the way tools were organized on a particular workstation. The tools themselves were standard issue and properly maintained, but their arrangement suggested that someone had been working on a specific type of repair repeatedly. Maria had learned to recognize these patterns. Maintenance crews developed habits and routines that left subtle traces of their work. What concerned her was that this pattern suggested repeated work on the same type of component, which could indicate a recurring problem that hadn't been properly addressed. Maria approached the lead technician for that section, Staff Sergeant Kim Peterson, a woman about Maria's age who had been working on military aircraft for 8 years. Sergeant Peterson, I've noticed some tool arrangements that suggest repeated work on navigation systems. Has there been an ongoing issue with any of the aircraft in this section? Kim looked at the workstation Maria indicated, then back at her with surprise. That's remarkably observant. We've had intermittent problems with GPS calibration on 2 of the F-35s. The issues are minor and within acceptable parameters, but we've been making small adjustments regularly. How long has this been going on? About 3 weeks. The problem started just after the aircraft returned from an exercise at another base. Maria felt the familiar tingle of concern that had led her to discover the platform crack months earlier. What kind of exercise? Electronic warfare training. They were exposed to simulated jamming and interference scenarios. As Kim explained the details, Maria realized that the GPS calibration issues might not be random maintenance problems. If the aircraft had been exposed to sophisticated electronic interference during training, there might be subtle damage to sensitive components that wasn't immediately obvious but could cause problems over time. Have the navigation systems been tested under stress conditions since the exercise? Maria asked. Kim shook her head. Just routine checks. Everything passes normal diagnostics. Maria suggested a more comprehensive evaluation, including tests that would simulate the electronic warfare conditions the aircraft had experienced. It was beyond her authority to order such tests, but she could recommend them through the safety office. The comprehensive testing revealed exactly what Maria had suspected. The electronic warfare exercise had caused minor damage to shielding in the GPS systems of several aircraft. The damage wasn't severe enough to cause immediate failures, but it could lead to navigation problems during actual combat missions, where electronic interference was common. The discovery led to immediate inspections of all aircraft that had participated in the exercise, and several were found to have similar issues. More importantly, it revealed a gap in post-exercise inspection protocols that was quickly addressed across the entire fleet of F-35s. Colonel Mitchell called Maria to her office once again, but this time the meeting had a different tone. The colonel was preparing for promotion to general, and she wanted to discuss Maria's future before she left Nellis. Ms. Santos, in less than a year, you've identified safety issues that have prevented multiple potential accidents and led to improvements in procedures that will affect aircraft operations globally. The Air Force Safety Center wants to offer you a position at their headquarters. You'd be working on safety protocols for all Air Force installations worldwide. The offer was both exciting and daunting. It would mean moving across the country, leaving her family and the community she had known all her life. But it would also mean contributing to aviation safety on a scale she had never imagined possible. There's something else, Colonel Mitchell continued. Lieutenant Williams specifically requested to speak with you before he deploys. I believe he has something he wants to say. That afternoon, Maria met Danny at the same spot outside Hangar 7 where they had first talked. He was dressed in his flight suit, preparing for what would be his final training flight before deployment. I wanted to thank you properly before I leave, Danny said, his usual casual demeanor replaced by something more formal and serious. You've already thanked me many times, Lieutenant. No, I don't think you understand what you've really done. Danny paused, looking across the flight line where several aircraft were preparing for takeoff. That platform incident was just the beginning. Your work here has changed how we think about safety, how we observe our environment, how we take care of each other. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a challenge coin, a military tradition where special coins are given to recognize exceptional service or significant events. This is from my entire squadron, Danny said, holding out the coin. One side shows the squadron emblem. The other side is engraved with your name and the date you found that crack. We want you to know that every mission we fly, every training exercise we complete safely, is partly because of what you've taught us about paying attention to details. Maria took the coin, feeling its weight and the significance of what it represented. Challenge coins were not given lightly in military culture. They represented respect, appreciation, and membership in an exclusive community. Lieutenant Williams, Maria said, then paused. Danny, I need to tell you something. When I found that crack, I was just doing my job. I never expected it to change my life or anyone else's, but you taught me something equally important. What's that? You showed me that every person's work matters, no matter what their rank or position. You could have just said thank you and moved on, but instead you took the time to help me understand the bigger picture. That's why I've been able to contribute more than just cleaning or basic inspections. Danny smiled. It sounds like we learned from each other. As they shook hands, Maria realized that this moment represented the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of another. Danny would deploy to serve his country in combat zones around the world. Maria would move to Air Force Safety Center headquarters to help develop protocols that would protect pilots and ground crews globally. 6 weeks later, as Maria was packing her apartment for the move to her new assignment, she received an email that made her smile. It was from Danny, sent from his deployment location. The message was brief but meaningful. Maria, flew my first combat mission today. Navigation systems worked perfectly. GPS was spot on. Thanks for having my wing. Danny. Attached to the email was a photo of Danny with his squadron mates standing in front of their aircraft in an undisclosed location. On the back of his helmet, barely visible in the photo, was a small decal with the words Guardian of Hangar 7. Maria carefully printed the photo and placed it in her new safety inspector manual, a reminder of how a simple moment of attention to detail had grown into something much larger. As she drove away from Nevada toward her new assignment, she thought about her parents' lessons about taking pride in honest work and how those lessons had led her to a career she never could have imagined. At the Air Force Safety Center, Maria would help develop inspection protocols used by safety personnel around the world. Her methods, based on the observational skills she had developed while cleaning aircraft hangars, would become part of the standard training for safety inspectors across multiple military services. But more than the professional recognition or career advancement, what Maria treasured most was the knowledge that her careful attention to everyday details had kept people safe. Whether it was a pilot conducting a combat mission halfway around the world or a maintenance crew working on aircraft at bases across the globe, her work had contributed to their safety and success. Years later, when Maria became a senior safety instructor, she would tell her students about the morning she found a small crack in a maintenance platform. She would explain how that moment taught her that safety wasn't just about following checklists or conducting formal inspections. It was about caring enough to notice when something wasn't quite right and having the courage to speak up, even when it might seem like a small thing. "Remember," she would tell them, "there's no such thing as an unimportant detail when people's lives depend on your vigilance. Every day you come to work, someone's safety depends on how well you pay attention." The challenge coin from Danny's squadron remained on her desk throughout her career, a reminder that heroism often begins with simply doing your job with care and attention, and that the smallest actions can have the most profound consequences.